Well, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock on Friday, so it is Flashcard Friday. And last week we did kind of an overview of the minor prophets, and today we're going to cover two of the ones that Pastor Chad will not be covering on Sunday. And we're just going to kind of do a quick overview of these two. But there are some hidden things in these two that are just they're just absolutely incredible. And I know I talked last week about really needing to look at a map. I openly admit I'm not a very good drawer, but I did the best I could to show you what it would have looked like during Hosea and Obadiah's time frame. So what you have here is this blue area right here. That would have been Judah. So that was the southern kingdom. And then this whole red area here, that would have been the northern kingdom. That would have been Israel. And that's during Hosea and Obadiah's time frames. Now, obviously, over time, that has changed. And I've put some of those changes in here. But it's as a result of what we're gonna read in these verses here. So to give you a little bit of kind of context, the Mediterranean Sea is here. Egypt is over here. Phoenicia is over here. Syria would actually be over here. The Dead Sea is right here. The Sea of Galilee, is right there. So that kind of gives you a little bit of reference as to where we are. So we're going to start out in Hosea, and kind of just a quick overview. Hosea was called by God to marry. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. He was called to marry an unclean woman. He was called to marry a prostitute, and he was called to marry that prostitute because God was angry with Israel. Israel had fallen into disarray. They were worshiping all kinds of false gods and false idols, and God had pretty much reached his limit. So he said, I want you to marry this unfaithful woman so that the people can see what my relationship looks like with them. And so Hosea does that, and he goes in and he marries a woman named Gomer. And right off the bat, Gomer gets pregnant and she has a child. And there's something very important about what God tells Hosea to name that child. So we're actually going to start with Hosea 1. And I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read verses 4 through 6. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel. I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day, I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. Okay, so what I did on the map was this right here is the valley of Jezreel, and this X right here would represent actually where Jezreel actually is. So obviously, things have taken place there, and God's incredibly angry. So he wants Hosea to name his child Jezreel. Now, what's really cool about this, actually, I will get to that in a second, because there's actually several cool things in this. Later on in Hosea 2:23, Gomer is going to give birth to two more children. She's going to give birth to a girl, and she's going to give birth to a boy. And God tells Hosea to name them some specific names as well. So just really quickly, God wants him to name the daughter Lo Ruhama, which means not loved. And then later on, when she gets pregnant with the boy, he says, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. And again, God wants him to name them those children because he wants the Israelites this northern kingdom, he wants them to know that they're no longer his kids and they're no longer loved by God. He's angry, and they are about to face a punishment. They are about to be taken over by Assyria. Assyria is going to kind of come from over here, and they are going to take this whole area. They're going to take all of this down in here. You know, and God is pretty much explaining, you're not going to get it all back. You've wronged me, and you think I'm just going to completely restore you, but I'm not. You're not going to get the whole thing back. And then in Hosea 2, actually, nope, I'm going to read in verse 1, I'm going to read, in chapter 1, I'm going to read verse 11. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader, and he will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Okay, so again, he's talking about this area here, and he's talking about a time when Israel and Judah are actually going to come back together. They're going to become one country again. And something very important is going to happen in Jezreel. So if you were to look at the map today of what Israel looks like today, there's parts that are missing. Okay, so Israel is going to come up like this, and they're going to go around. Then they're going to come over here and around, just follow these dotted lines, and then around like this, and they're going to come into a point like that. And we're going to talk about this in just a minute when we talk about Obadiah. Okay, that's what Israel is going to look like. The land that they lose is this land right here. So if you've ever heard of the West Bank and the battle that takes place in the West Bank, they're talking about this area right here. Israel still thinks it's theirs. Jordan thinks it's theirs. Syria thinks it belongs to them. There's all these people that think that they own this land. And this is the land that God took away from Israel. So it is still to this day under some argument. But what's really cool is in that prophecy, they're talking about the Messiah. That the Messiah is the one that's going to take them to the next step. And it's going to happen in Jezreel. So if you were to actually look at a map today, this is no longer the valley of Jezreel. This is the valley of Megiddo. Megiddo is the town that's found just up here. Jezreel no longer exists. It's no longer called that. It has a new name, and that new name is Nazareth. So some 900 years before the birth of Christ, God said something pretty cool is going to happen in Nazareth, and it's going to bring my people back together. It's going to bring them back to me. And then the second little gem that's found in Hosea is found in chapter 2. And again, it's dealing with what we talked about with God specifically naming those children not my people and not loved. When you look in chapter 2, verse 23, God says, I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those I called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. Now, basically that's a prophecy about Israel being restored. And it actually comes true because when you look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 10, Peter is actually going to fulfill that promise when he says, once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. He's pretty much telling them God's accepting them back. You don't get this area. That's the area that you lost for your actions. But you get this all back. Judah will come back. Israel will come back. You two will join together and you will become God's people once again. But again, it came at a price. So, think about the times in your life when God's calling you to something and you don't want to do it and you run away and you backslide. You may still get things, but sometimes you're going to be missing a big chunk of what you could have had. Israel could have had this whole thing, but they messed it up and they gave it up because they wouldn't listen and because they turned so many different times from God. Now, Obadiah is actually not written to Israel or Judah. It's written to Edom. And if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Edom and the fact that this whole area is Esau. This is Esau's generation. These are his kids that own all of that. And in Obadiah's entire message, it's one chapter. It's a really good read. It's really cool. It's really sad because Obadiah pretty much tells these guys what's going to happen to them, and that they're not going to like it. And I think it really culminates itself in verse 10, where it says, "Because of your violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be destroyed forever." You will be destroyed forever. Again, Jacob and Esau were brothers. Jacob tricked Esau into giving up his fortune, but they made amends. Jacob bowed before his brother. They made amends, and then something happens, and Esau goes his own way. And you read all throughout First and Second Kings about the Moabites attacking Judah and Edom attacking Judah, and all of these things happening, and eventually God says, "Okay, enough. You guys are going to go away." And pretty much, and they do, because again, Babylon, the Babylonian Empire comes up this way, and they take this whole area, and the Assyrians come in this way, and they take all of this. So this whole area has now been overrun. And eventually the Roman Empire is going to come in there. But as of today, so again, 2,000 years later, Edom is gone, Moab is gone, and Ammon is gone. This area here is now Jordan. Israel took a big chunk, and this area over here is now Egypt. And it's because Esau attacked his brother. So again, when you take all of this stuff and you look at your own life, stop and think, what's going to happen if I wrong my brother? What's going to happen if I don't do those things that God's calling me to do? He calls all of us to do some things that are uncomfortable and that we don't like. But he calls us to do them for a reason. He calls us to do that because he knows the end of this story. He knows how it all ends. Before Jezreel was even destroyed, he knew that was going to be Nazareth. He knew that's where his son was going to grow up. God knows the story of your life. How are you going to treat your brother? How are you going to treat your friend? How are you going to treat your neighbor? Do you want to wind up like this? Or do you want to follow God? Do you want to follow somebody who's going to love you with a love that has no bounds? I want to learn from these guys. I don't want to avoid these guys. I want to learn from them. I'd love for you guys to join me. It would be so cool. So that's what I have for today. Next week, we'll take on a couple more of them. I hope you guys have a phenomenal weekend. I love getting to spend time with you. I hope you're getting something out of these. I look forward to seeing you all on Sunday, and I hope you have a phenomenal weekend. We'll see you later.